Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. Man, Troy, we took a little break. That was the first time we had a little break from each other in a while over the holidays and stuff, man.
It has been more than 3 years, man. I can't believe this, Brian. It's been more than crazy. 3 years. We've interviewed more than it's got to be 200 plus or somewhere near that, right?
Yeah, now we're starting to get the big names on, man. We finally made a name for ourselves. So you can do the announcement of who we have today.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. So I was going back through the old rambunctious comments I've made in the past, and I'm eating a little bit of humble pie. So I actually met Dr. Jacob May, who is a registered dietitian. He's a PhD and an RD. He studies human nutrition. He has clinical experience. He's done work on ketones. He's also has 2 new studies out that are top 15 in ASN in terms of most impressions and most read and trending. One of which is a study on whole grains versus processed grains and their effect on I think it was body composition, if I'm not mistaken. And then another study that caught my eye was, his name was on the carnivore study. So his Twitter handle is Cake Nutrition, and he's doing research on carnivore. So I was like, damn,
And he's a buff dude too, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's a previous, I think he played college football, and we've crossed paths before. We've met maybe 3 or 4 years back at an obesity medicine conference, and this like 6'2" guy, freaking stacked up, threatened to beat me up for my Twitter rambunctious. No, I'm just kidding. That never happened. So it was actually me saying, damn, please don't beat me up, for my Twitter rambunctious comments. So look, Dr. Jacob May, I'm happy to have you here. I'm eating a little humble pie, which is fine. We all deserve a little humble pie. Rosette will make sure it's low carb. And I'm happy to have you here. And let's start. How did you get started? When did you say, you know what, I'm going to become a registered dietitian? Because I got to be honest with you, I've been interested in healthcare for 20 years, and there's not a time in my life where I was like, oh, I can't wait to see that dietitian. So help me understand what made you. Actually, to be honest, I was looking into it myself. I was debating to do it myself. So go ahead. How did you get started?
Well, first off, thank you guys so much for having me on. This is an awesome podcast, and so I'm happy to be here and chat with some low carb people. Just a heads up for everyone. I'm not quite as a huge outward proponent of like the ketogenic low carb diet, but I do recognize its potential clinical utility. And so I love what you guys are doing. Really cool stuff, just kind of spreading information. And I think that's always a good thing, especially what you guys do in clinic, which is like, what else do we want to do as healthcare practitioners other than to help people? And I think you guys do that in a unique and special way. So very, very cool. Happy to be on. In terms of my interest, man, I've always had issues with obesity, like since I was a kid, right? So like 5th, 6th grade, I was probably one of the heaviest kids in school, but I always played sports, so I was athletic. And then came into junior high football, and they're like, hey man, you got to weigh less than 135 to carry the football. I'm like, well, that's messed up, dude. How am I gonna do that? So I did the Atkins ketogenic diet. My dad was a avid weightlifter back in his day, and so he's like, hey man, try this out. And so that's what I did. So that was like my first, I'll never forget the first feeling I had where I had this drastic change to my diet. I tried to lose weight plenty of times before. It's hard as a kid, but
this is 6th grade. You did Atkins?
This was 7th grade. Yeah. 7th going into 8th. Yeah. But I went into Atkins, and I'll never forget like how my whole body felt different. And it wasn't all good, right? Like the energy was low. I had headaches, but I'll never forget that situation where I was like, whoa, nutrition really affects your body. that's kind of crazy, you know. And we'd heard things about like you are what you eat and all that, but that's when it really hit home for me early on. But I kind of left that to the side and kept my educational route separate from my nutrition interests.
Yeah, I'd imagine being like a seventh grader, very insulin sensitive, going on low carb. I mean, keto flu would be like a light way of describing it.
Yeah, it was brutal. But the, you know, the downsides and the upsides, I made weight. I got to play running back. It was the only time I ever played running back in football again, by the way. I was not a good running back. I played offensive line in high school and then defensive line in college. Played up at Case Western. I played nose tackle for them freshman through junior year.
I played nose guard in high school, but I was too small. I wasn't 6'2", man, so I didn't get a playing so I had to go to medicine.
6'2" are like my football stats with cleats on.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
yeah, I made it. I was like 6 foot at some point on my football stats. That was really nice of them with the helmet and shoes and everything.
Yeah. But yeah, so anyway,
when you're cutting as a kid, you know, because I was there too, same thing, struggled with obesity. Dad wasn't a bodybuilder, but you know, I did all sorts of crazy stuff. So help me understand, did you do anything else as a kid? I mean, isn't it terrible that we like, you know, the pressure we put on kids to lose weight and what they do? Like I remember in high school gym class, like people putting garbage bags over them and kind of like running through the hallways. Brian, did you do anything like that?
I wrestled, man. So all these guys you would see like the morning of weigh-ins, it was people were rolling themselves up in wrestling mats and running and spitting and making themselves bleed, punching themselves in the nose to make themselves bleed a little bit to make weight. It was insane, man, what people did.
That's crazy. It wasn't quite that. So I did wrestle for 1 year. Heavyweight though, so I didn't have to do any of the crazy.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a good weight, man.
But did you do anything else? Did you do any other crazy?
I wouldn't call it crazy. So like, I mean, I was always like a smart kid or whatever, you know. So you get magazines and you read them and you kind of see what's in there, right? So I did slim fast meal replacements for a little bit. That helped, you know, a couple pounds, but it wasn't really doing it because I would just overeat at the other meals. I moved to the Ensure meal replacements, and for whatever reason, those worked actually pretty well for me. But I needed.
So you're buying Ensure, like you're like 11th grade buying Ensure.
Oh, dude, this was back when Ensure was in. I don't know if you remember this. They were in like aluminum cans.
Oh yeah, you couldn't break them. Yeah, they were like
so
like
that's way back when I used the Ensure. Yeah, I used my paper route money on that stuff, man. That was just what I did. But the weight loss wasn't going fast enough, and I needed to make weight for football. So then I went over to Atkins. But yeah, so I tried those other things. You know, it's tough too when you don't have, like, my mom and dad were always fit, right? But they were fit because they just generally ate well and like didn't convert to like that fast food sort of lifestyle. And for whatever reason, the food around us as a kid, I overate. None of my other siblings did. It was really just it was an issue with me, with what I was doing within my environment, you know? So, but it was like, yeah, it's tough as someone who is struggling with obesity and you just don't have the resources, which are often expensive, to be able to find where to go. And the ketogenic route was like the fast track for me. It just like was easy. I could do it within the means where we were living, and you know, that's how it went.
So what happens next? I'm just curious. Okay, so you did diets, you understand the power, you got crazy keto flu, and you're a smart kid, you're playing football. Where did you end up playing football?
So I played football. I played football in high school, but then I played in college at Case Western. I went there as an engineering major, and you know, you have your
the engineering. No, we have. It's always the engineers showing up to the doctors.
Yeah, because you think differently, right? Yeah, it's totally true.
I don't know what it is. It is kind of funny how like there's just a lot of engineers here. But so I went to Case to be an engineer. And on the side, I just kept reading about nutrition. The goal at the time was athletics, right? I wanted my biceps to be bigger, right? I wanted to be bigger, faster, stronger for athletics or otherwise, right?
And were you pretty bulked up at that time playing in college?
Yeah, I mean, I'm about the size I am now. I probably had more muscle and a little less fat back then, but yeah, my playing weight was like somewhere over the 3 years, probably 225 up to 245. And then like I would always just personally, for just completely vain reasons, I like to cut down to abs in the off season. So then I'd cut weight in the off season and then go back up and, you know.
And how were you cutting weight when you were doing that? Just cutting your calories and exercising more, or what?
Yeah. I typically did like 3 workouts a day. It was a ton of cardio because you have a short window in the off season to do it. I wouldn't recommend the route I went. It wasn't like a super healthy route. It was just something I did because.
But the smart thing is when you came back and, you know, in the fall, you were in good shape. You weren't stressed. Everyone else was drinking beers and hanging out and going, oh, throwing up at practice.
Yeah, I always did all right. But yeah, so that was football. And then I guess it was really my sophomore year where I noticed I was spending so much of my free time on the like reading nutrition, reading PubMed, reading other things, right? Just like following through with what I was doing in high school, but you just had more time in high school. So now I'm in college and I'm sacrificing engineering homework and reading time for nutrition time. And I wasn't doing well in my engineering classes because of that.
Yeah, because you find your passion and you go, this is what I want to do. And that's when you know you're doing what you love to do.
Yeah, you're dead on. So I was just like, forget this, man. Maybe there's a way for me to do like nutrition for my career. And so I transferred over. I was a nutrition student, and that was kind of the turning point in where I was going engineering to taking what I just love to do 24/7 and turning that into what I can do 24/7.
That's awesome, man. So how'd you progress? You go to nutrition school, they teach you all this stuff.
Yeah. So then the plan was like, all right, I'm going to get a nutrition degree. What do I do from there? The plan at the time was my dad was a small business owner in Cleveland, Ohio. So at the time I was like, you know what, I'll own my own like personal training business, but I want a nutrition degree to go behind it, right? Just to kind of separate yourself from like all the other amazing people that are doing that sort of work, right? And then one thing that was really important for me was finding like mentors at Case that pushed me down a certain route, that like pushed you to do better and like do things beyond what you thought was kind of possible. So like I grew up a pretty low income kid. So like my goal was to like get a job where I could make, you know, $30,000-$40,000 a year and like do that. And then I did it. There wasn't a thought of like, is this really what I love to do or otherwise? And so then you have mentors that are saying like, hey, there's so much beyond like just getting enough money to live. You can do impactful things. You can get into the healthcare field and otherwise. And so there was just some phenomenal mentors at Case Western that really pushed me to kind of go further. And that's when I decided to like get involved in research. And so it was at Case Western. I don't know if you guys know the location of like Case Western and the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, but like Case Western's here and like Cleveland Clinic is like right here, like right by each other. Right. So I remember must have been probably junior-ish year in undergrad. And I had these talks with my Case Western mentors and they're like, hey man, you know, you got to look into this. And someone had mentioned research. And so I'm like, all right, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. You know, one of the things where you just kind of sit back and like view the future world and think about it. And then I sent a cold email to Dr. John Kerwin at the Cleveland Clinic, who at the time was one of the most highly established metabolic nutrition researchers at the Cleveland Clinic, right? And I'm just some random undergrad kid, send him an email and I'm just like, hey man, I love what you do. Is there any way I could, you know, volunteer in your lab or get experience? And I was just thinking, all right, send this guy an email. I won't hear back. And I still have the email saved to this day because John came back and said, yeah, come on in, let's talk about it. And from there, I've been really working with John almost ever since. I started doing undergrad work at the Cleveland Clinic. I did my PhD under one of his former mentees. And then I came back and now I'm working with him at Pennington Biomedical Research Center, where he's now the executive director of the whole research center. So, you know, there's something to be said about like following your passion, but also like really following those mentors that are trying to push you in the right direction or in a positive direction and like use that momentum to keep going.
Yeah. And sometimes just reaching out, just having the courage to reach out and go, hey, throw it out there. It's not, the worst thing they can do is say no, right?
Yeah.
So now what is it transformed into?
Yeah, so now like I get to be something I like, never in my wildest dreams as a kid, right? Growing up in Cleveland was like, oh man, I'll definitely be able to like go be a researcher someday. Researchers to me were like astronauts. Like there was like, okay, that's like a cool thing you could wish for, but like let's have a real plan to see what you can do with your life, right? And so now I'm sitting here. I mean, honestly, man, I'm just having a great time. I get to do nutrition research and it's fun. I get to do stuff like this and chat with people. And I'm a registered dietitian as well. So I get to do one-on-one counseling of a side private practice, a very small one. But like, it's a great life. I really can't complain about how the whole process has went.
So what are big things you've learned along the way where you go, okay, guys, let me set you guys straight on a couple things? Because I'm learning. I mean, I'm seeing stuff now, Tro, still, and I go, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, we're learning stuff, man.
You know, I still can't come up with a reason to eat carbohydrate other than preference or hypoglycemia.
Let's see what Jake says, man. It was not the Tro
Jake
show
can
here.
tell me, Tro, am I off? Is there a reason other than symptomatic hypoglycemia and preference for me to have carbo? Is there? Am I crazy?
You know, for you in particular, that might be the case. I would say once you move and bring in that athletic world, I think it really changes the game. And I think you have a lot of people, even doing casual athletics, that still benefit from the carbohydrates. And so I think, you know, it gets a little dicey to have kind of a broad recommendation when you have kids like myself, right back in junior high and high school. If I was on a low carb diet, maybe I wouldn't have been as good at football. Just because
we should be very clear. We're talking about the 50 to 70% of the average American. So I think you're absolutely right. Very insulin sensitive people. It is a completely different dynamic, right? So young people, athletes, they have absolutely have unique needs. I was just being a little cheeky.
No, I get it. And so like I figured so. But just to clarify, that's where I would see that, when you look at the general population, like food preference is important. Like I don't want to underline how important food preference is. And I'm also like so here at Pennington, I was also on an NIH T32, which is like a training grant to get you experience in a certain area. And that was on botanical compounds that could impact like metabolic syndrome and improve it. And so botanical compounds being things from plants and grains and otherwise. So I do think there's
like
something
like polyphenols and antioxidants and
absolutely betaine and all these things. And
so, can you help me? Because we see this a lot. I see a lot of plant-based researchers touting the benefits of, for example, I saw a cardiologist very recently say, buy this high resveratrol wine, right? This is the wine you should buy because there's the most antioxidants. So when I looked into the literature for any sort of major outcomes on vitamin use, polyphenol use, antioxidant use, you kind of run into this. I don't see a huge clinical impact, but tell me if not to say they don't have impacts. Like I've seen pistachio supplementation improve, self-perception of erectile strength, for example. I've seen, studies showing that polyphenols, or fiber-rich foods are associated with a wide diversity of microbiota, right? So like these very nebulous clinical endpoints, but I've never seen any major like, hey, this polyphenol supplementation reversed NASH, which I know is an area that you've studied in the past. So help me understand, like, is it a thing or is it not a thing?
Yeah, so this is how I view it. And this, I do, first off, let me say, I do have kind of like a hippie perspective on some things where it's like, look, man, like the world made this wide variety of things for us to use and benefit from. And there are things we don't quantify in a lot of these foods. Some we do now, like resveratrol and otherwise. But if you did a dietary analysis on someone, you wouldn't get resveratrol content, right? You get carbs, proteins, fats, whatever, macro, micronutrients, because those are things that we know have a large impact on physiology and you need enough of. Then there's these other things, like you mentioned, resveratrol or phytosterols or these other compounds that we have some indication that they may have some sort of effect in the body, but certainly they haven't reached a major clinical utility. Otherwise, they would be way more important than they are. But I think there's something to be said for giving your body a variety of all these different things that we don't quantify, and we don't know exactly what they do, but clearly they were here helping us come along. And so I do have that just kind of general perspective of like, look, there's all these phytonutrients, or technically they're phytochemicals. There are no like phytonutrients. If there's any like chem majors on here that are gonna like bash me, right? Like, yeah, all right, it's phytochemicals, but I like, it sounds better as phytonutrients, right? So, but there's zoonutrients too, right? So we have those molecules that come from red meats and otherwise. You have bioactive proteins, you have bioactive lipids. You know, we see things like the milk-based proteins do specific effects beyond just being protein themselves, right? So I think it goes both routes. I don't think it's necessarily something that's just plants or grains or otherwise. I think it's something to be said for all the eating material we have available to us. And there's so many items we don't quantify. I just think they probably have a role in long-term health. And the best evidence we would have from that is like the stuff you have from blue zones or otherwise, where you have these guys, like certainly there's a lot of other things there, lower calories, blah, blah, blah. But something that's also there is a massive amount of diet variety. And so that's kind of my like general perspective on it. But I totally agree with you where I don't think there's clinical utility for finding one of these thousands and thousands of phytonutrients and saying, hey, jam this one in, it'll be really beneficial for you. So that's like my general perspective.
I love like I love the ideal. I remember being a 20-year-old bodybuilder and this personal trainer, I not bodybuilder, but somebody in the gym. I've always loved going to the gym. And the owner of the gym at the time said, you know, just go to like the ethnic food store by you and go buy some different things that you've never eaten before. You don't know what antioxidant is going to be there. And I remember thinking like, holy crap, I would eat everything in that store. Are you sure that's a good idea? And then fast forward, 20 years later, I put on 150 pounds. Do you think it's an actionable, I agree with you. No other animal restricts what they eat, right? Have you seen any other species restrict their food intake the way humans do in any of the research you've done?
No, I don't do a lot of animal research. There's some cool stuff with like mice work that Pennington has done, but that's more manipulating what's in their food rather than having them choose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any other animal would seek out for, whether it's like health, kind of cerebrally driven health goals, modify their intake.
Oh, okay. So here, all right, man. Oh, there's this. Oh, what was this book? This is so cool. I think it's called Wild Health. But it's this book, and you know what? If we get a break, I'll run over and I'll grab the book and I'll reference it for you guys. But it is so cool, and it talks about how animals do things like that. So there'll be animals that are sick, and they'll seek out specific foods and eat them. It's not restriction, but there's something like where, for whatever reason, animals can like understand the impact that different nutrients have on their body. I can't remember if there's anything where they like, if they got sick, they wouldn't eat certain things. They definitely like
it's like humans too with pica or something like that. You have weird stuff where you crave certain things when your salt is low or something like that.
Yeah. So there's like, I'll get that book and reference it for everyone because it is so cool. I'm a huge fan.
I mean, there are certainly certain things like, severe illness, high TNF states like that make you just not hungry, right? So like cancer and stuff like that. But I mean, the way that the typical person would restrict food, I don't think I've seen any study to say.
Well, you're saying it's just nature, right? Like a bear is going to gain a bunch of weight, then they lose a bunch of weight, then they gain a bunch of weight, then they lose. I mean, they're changing their intake and their activity and all that stuff, right?
But it's a response to the environment,
sure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I've talked to a couple of bears. They don't tell me what they're thinking or whether
but I'm just saying, like, we don't necessarily do that. So I like this idea of like, okay, maybe include foods and a variety of foods, and maybe that, but we know that including a variety of foods stimulates intake. So how do we balance like this ideal, which I get it, like let's include, like, why would any other organism not want to get the nutrients from, I don't know, cherries or whatever, right? So why would we, eliminate that? But then you have pretty good data showing that eliminating that helps certain things. So help me understand, and we now have pretty good data saying increased variety increases your intake. And if we believe in the Kiko model, it's that increased intake that it's really problematic. So help me balance this, because Eat the Rainbow is problematic for me, my own biases, So and tell me where I'm off.
So I don't think you're off. What I'll give here is I'll give my personal perspective as a dietitian, not necessarily just kind of like the perspective that I would give that I think are necessary in like dietary guidelines, where it's a huge like public facing sort of thing. I do think when I work with people on an individual level, and it's someone that's struggling with obesity, one of the things you have to do is try and implement some form of restriction. Otherwise, you're just not going to lose weight, right? And typically, when I look at the different food servings, the first thing we go after are almost always like carbohydrates, also nuts, just because they're really heavy. But we cut down grains, and we try to keep fruits high, vegetables high, protein higher, and moderate dairy. And so that's just kind of my personal approach to it. And then after you work with someone, and often this is longer than a year, right? They get down to a weight that is just a healthier body weight for them. Then we look at transitioning foods back in and helping them improve their diet variety. And now that they've gone through the struggle of restriction, it's what I've experienced just in my private practice. It's a little easier for them to have that sort of control in terms of eating variety without necessarily overeating. And everyone will fluctuate, right? And so that's why constant contact with a care provider, someone else tracking your weight and saying, hey, you know what, over the last 3 months, we're up about 10 pounds. Let's look at what's going on and kind of revisit what we can do. I'm not saying we have to necessarily lose 10 pounds, but we got to make sure we don't stay on that trajectory.
Something's wrong. Yeah, that is so huge. That's what Tro and I have been pushing a lot too, is like when you have that constant contact, like we have the continuous glucose monitor, the scale, the blood pressure cup, all those things. And, I'll tell you, and Tro, I'll tell you, this is kind of intriguing to me since the holidays. In the last week, 4 people I've seen lost weight over the holidays. And I go, so what'd you do? What'd you change? What'd you do different? Like one guy went to Mexico, was having virgin margaritas. He was like eating all kinds of stuff that he shouldn't be. He goes, but what it told him, he said, the stress I was under. So he took 2 weeks off of work, lowering those stress hormones, cortisol, whatever it is, it made a huge, and I have 4 patients who had the same experience over the holidays, where they weren't going crazy, eating crazy stuff, but they were losing weight where they were plateaued. Boom, they lost weight over the holidays when everyone else gained a few pounds, right?
Wow, that's a rarity.
It's crazy.
I've seen it happen one time, actually one of my recent
but these are high stress people that have high stress, like high end jobs where they're running corporations and doing all this stuff, when they just I don't know. That's the only correlation I see that makes sense.
There's Jade. I'm sure, Jake, you've seen that data on there's diet holidays are associated with improved long-term compliance, right? So like, if you're so rigid in your goals and you don't take this is why, I'm really in favor of the long-term, spare tire approach to low carb, quote unquote, replacement foods, is because if those diet holidays and that feel like being human and experiencing a holiday with something sweet, there is something to that's not, that works on maybe a psychological level, a stress level, feeling normal. So, who knows, right?
Yeah, not stressing about everything you're eating and worrying about macros and all that stuff. I think at some point it's self-defeating.
And I love that you called it a diet holiday, as opposed to like the colloquial term that's used all the time is like cheat meal. And I hate having a negative connotation to like doing something for your body just because it's not like towards a low calorie weight loss goal. I hate that's called cheating. I love the concept of a diet holiday, a positive spin, eating differently to keep your compliance going. So I love that concept. I'm probably going to use that term from now on. I hope you don't mind. I like that a lot.
No, it's not me. It's been, studied in the literature. In bodybuilders, for example, those diet holidays have shown to be effective. It's probably a psychological effect. And you see that, it's funny when the bro science people and the fasting people agree, I start to pay attention. The fasting people say, don't do chronic restriction, do fasting and feasting, right? Like have periods where you eat generously and maybe you'll go exercise a little bit more. And, it's called the reverse diet in the bro science world, which is a period of hypercaloria to prevent those chronic adaptions. And I don't think there's any good data. I've searched for data. The only data I've seen supportive of that is this diet holiday data that shows its long-term psychological impacts and sort of long-term compliance impacts. But when these two people agree, now I'm like paying attention. You know what I mean? Like they never agree, right? So I think there's something there. So okay, so I want to pivot a little bit because I saw a poster that you did several years ago on a ketogenic diet, and I'm like, this guy, the balls, man. He's got a thing called Cake Nutrition, right? And cakenutrition.com is his website, and his Twitter handle is Cake Nutrition, and he freaking studies ketosis and liver health. And then I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have been such a jerk. And so we met it. And,
yeah, you were a jerk, actually. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, a little bit.
I probably wasn't the nicest. I get a little,
So what happened? So how did you get your handle, Jake? How did you come up with Cake Nutrition? Just to kind of throw it in up a little bit, or just say, hey, look, cake's okay sometimes, or what?
Hey, cake rhymes with Jake. I was like called Cake
right.
a couple times as a kid by some close friends. It wasn't really like a nickname, so to speak, but it was like, if someone called me Cake, I would respond to it, right? And I love the dichotomy. I love the dichotomy of cake nutrition. I just think it's cool.
Got it. Normalizing food. I think that's the other thing. But we live in such a weight stigma and weight heavy diet culture.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that like with my patients, if they have grandma's cookies on Christmas, whatever they're doing, I'm like, did you enjoy it? Like so many people, they'll say, oh my gosh, I felt so guilty. I was so sad. I was like, just enjoy it if you're going to stink and do it. The effects going to be the same on your body. And it's probably going to be worse if you're stressed about it. Just get over it, deal with it. And so many people, as a matter of fact, one of my patients, I love it. The first time I met with her, she said, look, doc, I'm not going to be hardcore keto. I'm not doing that. This is my nature. And she goes, sometimes I'm going to have a glass of wine. Sometimes I'm just doing this because she's done the whole 30. She's done all these restrictive diets. She can go a month and be like in boot camp, and then on day 31 she's eating cookies and donuts and binging. So she said, I need to be able to say, if I want a piece of bread every 2 weeks, can I do that? Yeah, go for it. And it's working, and she's done fantastic, right? Because she knows her mental state. And some people have one cookie and they can't stop for a month. It depends who you are ultimately.
That's me.
And that was the nature of our first in-person conversation, actually, Brian, what you're just bringing up. When I met Jake at 2019 ABOM, it was after a lecture where somebody in the audience, a dietitian, said, I don't believe that food addiction is real. And she said, I've never seen somebody, if you tell them eat all the ice cream you want, that they'll, eat all the ice cream and then keep eating. And it's funny when she made
in front of you.
Right. When she made this comment, I said, you've never met me. Like, I am that person, right? So I will keep eating ice cream. And I remember talking to Jake about it, and his approach was different. He's like, yeah, there are some people. So even the fact that a dietitian acknowledges this idea of food addiction, I hate calling it food addiction because we can live without alcohol and heroin, but we have to find a way to live with food. So I don't love the term food addiction, even though that's really what it is. Cravings on par with an addiction. So that was where you started.
And I think it's more processed food addiction, man. Very few people are like, I'm going to go eat broccoli all night. I'm sure there's people who do. Someone's like yelling at the radio right now. But, I mean, for the most part, it's going to be chips and cookies and donuts and all these comfort foods, we call them.
Yeah. And that's actually the discussion we had literally right in front of this poster. And I'm like, this guy with the Cake Nutrition handle is doing research on ketones. Like, help me understand this, So actually, you've had some scientific interest in kind of this realm of stuff, maybe personal interest, even hearing your story. So what, do you find that your colleagues are less interested in low carb phenomenon? I mean, clearly you're interested in it. Do you find that like people just don't care? You've worked with John Kerwin's probably studied diabetes for longer than I've been alive. Okay. And has he done any research on ketones before during the 10 years you've known him?
he hasn't, to my knowledge, and John's done so much work. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so like back in the 80s, he was doing some of the like really key physiological, like glycogen and exercise and nutrition handling sort of stuff that kind of built up out of, Ball State and the amazing work that's come out of there in exercise physiology. So he's a giant in the field. So I assume he probably measured ketones in some context somewhere, but I haven't seen like a big publication with him on it. And there's somewhat of a reason for that, right? Like, so a lot of what goes on in research is a little bit dictated by funding, right? And funding for us primarily comes
A little bit.
from the federal
lot
government, right? So you got to convince other people to like give you money to do work on something. So there's a lot of reasons why, there may not have been so much research, but there have been a lot of research on like ketogenic approaches and ketone body metabolism that were really back in the 80s that kind of really defined the physiology, and it didn't leave a lot of interesting questions to follow up on. So like Henry Brunengraber is just one of the most amazing ketone physiologists. He's out of Case Western also. And so, he does tracers and other items to look at what's going on with ketone body metabolism. And what was defined early on is far back as the 80s was that, they did, have you guys talked about like hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamps on here? And should I go into that at all? Do you guys want to hear what this
No,
is?
we have talked about it, hyperinsulinemic euglycemic, but the only time we've ever mentioned it was Regina Sinha's work on its effects on the brain with, the euglycemic, hypoglycemic clamp that she did. But yeah.
Oh yeah, those are cool.
Yeah.
Okay, can I take a brief sidebar and just kind of like
Yeah, go into it, man. People want to hear from you.
It's a critical research process that we use to understand someone's insulin sensitivity. So when you see huge papers that look at insulin sensitivity, like, like thousands and thousands of people, that's not the hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp. From here out, I'll just call it the clamp because it's a beast of a word to say, right? So what they use is
people don't know what that is, so they don't know what it is. So you have to explain to them what a hyperinsulin, what this clamp is, because it's the gold standard for the diagnosis of diabetes.
Yes.
Right. So it's the most accurate test we have. So can you just explain a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, definitely. So this is different from like HOMA IR, which you guys are well familiar with. I'm sure a lot of people are kind of familiar with it. It's just looking at glucose and insulin in your blood at a fasting time point and saying, based on these levels, we kind of think you might have insulin resistance. What the clamp does, this is super cool. So this is an inpatient study. We bring people in, they fast overnight, you control their diet a couple days before, right? So everything's nice and standardized. You lay them down in a hospital bed and you essentially infuse insulin and glucose into their body. So this clamp in particular is hyperinsulinemic. So what we do is we put people down and we infuse insulin, and we want to see what that insulin's doing in terms of carbohydrate metabolism. We're looking for the liver glucose production to turn off, and we're looking to see if we shove glucose into the body, can insulin appropriately tell that glucose to go into primarily their skeletal muscles, right? So we typically call it skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity. So the term clamp is because it's hyperinsulinemic, high insulin, euglycemic. So when we're infusing glucose into their body, we're also monitoring their blood sugar levels to make sure it doesn't go anywhere different from 90 milligrams per deciliter. So we keep them clamped at 90 milligrams per deciliter. And so based on the infusion you put in, which is a standard dose for everybody, you then give them a variable glucose infusion. And how much glucose they can take in and dump into their muscles and still keep their glucose at 90 milligrams per deciliter, that's an indicator of their insulin sensitivity. So long way about it, we're infusing insulin, we're infusing glucose, and that tells us someone's insulin sensitivity, and that's the gold standard. So my reason for bringing that up is because back in the 80s, Ralph DeFranzo and some other outstanding researchers did work to see if changing ketone levels could impact insulin sensitivity. This is important because insulin sensitivity is like the number one primary indicator of whether you will develop like type 2 diabetes, right? It is the initial physiologic insult that leads to type 2 diabetes. So if you can prevent that, you are really doing a great job. Even if you then struggle with obesity, you can prevent all those nasty downstream items. So they took people, they did this clamp, infused glucose, infused insulin, and then they added ketones, and they jammed ketones in there, right? About as much as you would see if you were on a strong ketogenic diet. And what happened to the insulin sensitivity? Nothing. Didn't change at all. And so this is really ironclad work using some of the best techniques. At the time, it was super novel. Now we use it all the time. But so we know for a fact that increasing ketones does not impact that skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity. So I think because of that work and work surrounding it, you didn't have a lot of interest in, using these sort of approaches. Also, low carb diet at the time was termed to be really unsustainable. It was more of a gimmick for sales.
At the time,
interpreted as such.
At the time, still now, still now. Okay, so. But
so the point is people who are taking exogenous ketones are really not going to make a difference.
So now here's the cool thing, right? So outside of clamps, people have been doing this exogenous ketone work or otherwise. I do work with MCTs in other disease states as well. The medium chain triglycerides. I forget how much is like common knowledge these days. So like fats are really long, right? And medium chain triglycerides are just shorter fats. But what's special about them is they essentially get used instantly as energy, but it's too much energy for the liver. So what does the liver do? It converts it into ketones. So with MCTs, you essentially, and again, many of your community may know this, but it's really just a way to increase ketones without needing to like drop carbs and increase fats massively. Anyway, so there's these other ways to address ketones outside of like ketone body infusions. That seem to be having an impact. Now they're looking at glucose control as opposed to insulin, as opposed to that like gold standard insulin resistance. And when I say glucose control, I mean like your response to a meal, right? You eat food, how does your blood sugar change? And there may be an effect there for these exogenous ketones. I'm not personally sold on it, but there's some cool work coming out on it. I think Jonathan Little's lab has done some cool stuff. If anyone's like reading around and see the name out there. So there's renewed interest in that realm, but I still believe in that prior work from the 80s, where if you just jack up ketones, it's not going to improve insulin sensitivity. And this leads to the work I did and the abstract out there is because I'm personally not as interested in what happens when you jack up ketones, but what happens when your normal ketone levels are lower than they should be. And whether that's from excessive carbohydrate intake or some form of insulin resistance, that who knows? But what happens when your basal fasting ketones are lower than they should be? And that's the work that I did in NAFLD, which was this abstract we were looking at. NAFLD being non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, typically something associated with obesity. But it's fat in your liver, and it's not good. Right?
Or excessive fructose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
What did you come up with?
I had to put that in there. I'm sorry. The LowCarbMD podcast, right?
What did your study show on the effects on the fatty liver disease?
We showed that people that had that reduced ability to have fasting ketones at a normal level. We're not talking high. We're talking like 0.25 millimolar as like just a normal overnight fasting level. People that had reduced amounts had worse insulin sensitivity. And so that's interesting to me is, okay, maybe it's not jacking up ketones that is potentially having an impact on insulin sensitivity or resistance based on the work that's been done in the 80s. But perhaps now we're seeing a lot of people that just have lower fasting levels, and maybe that's associated with an issue, whether it's a physiology issue that we can address or otherwise. And so that's what I'm really interested in investigating.
This takes out the whole process of like fat oxidation and adaptation. And it's such I guess like they just didn't know. But it's like, I look back on some of this research and I'm like, what were they thinking? Like, what were they really like? But I guess they just didn't know.
So I think what you're getting at, which I very much agree with, is that there ends up being a different physiology of people that don't eat carbohydrates a lot. And this is towards that fat adaptation and otherwise. But so if you have someone on a low carb diet for a while and someone that eats normally, and you give them both like our gold standard is the oral glucose tolerance test, right? You give someone sugar and you see how they respond to it, right? In terms of their blood glucose response. If you compare a person that eats carbohydrates normally and a person that doesn't, the person that doesn't eat carbohydrates normally will perform worse. They will have worse glucose tolerance. And that is like bad clinically. But does that matter if they're not?
No, it's bad clinically if you eat carbohydrates, right?
Yes, and that's the key point, right? So it's
well, but you could also prime the pump too, and if you eat carbs, because your body's just not used to making a ton of insulin to get rid of that sugar, so it's just a delayed reaction to that. So if you prime the pump a little bit, some of the studies are showing that if you eat carbs for a few days and then you give that same load, it doesn't. They handle it just like everyone else.
Yep, totally agree, and I'm in very much alignment with that research as well. So yeah, but I think that plays to this concept that like, look, this changes how your body is using fuel when you drop these carbs. And I don't think we have the best understanding on what that sort of physiology fully entails for a human, especially one struggling with this obesogenic environment and disease. One of the concerns that I do have is if you have someone on a low carb diet and then you have those diet holidays, right? You're not taking them and like re-implementing carbs. It's just short term. They will have a worse response than other people. Is that short term worse response more impactful than all the long term clearly lower responses? Or that's a question that I would have.
Yeah, and I'll tell you just clinically what's interesting to me. I have people that, for instance, they come to me as a poorly controlled diabetic. Or a person with diabetes, I'll say, because people get upset with me if we call people diabetic, but someone with diabetes, their sugars are terrible. They eat the same thing on Thanksgiving a year ago. This year they eat the same thing and the sugars don't respond so dramatically. But I think part of it's like this personal fat threshold. When all your fat storage and your liver glycogen is full, like you have nowhere to put the stuff, right? So I think people do get better with time.
Yeah, especially
they get
if you
more
see
insulin
weight loss
sensitive.
and otherwise with it. I totally agree. Like if you have that, then the benefits, like if you have someone lose 10 pounds, that benefit is huge. I mean, that's insanely huge in terms of their overall health. You know what I mean? So if you can use a low carb diet to lose 10 pounds, then some of these other minor differences that I've just been talking about, I mean, that's essentially irrelevant, right? You've done such a huge benefit to your health by kind of just dropping that weight a little bit. I think it ends up really outweigh.
Or if you, or I mean, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, personal fat threshold, or if you empty out visceral fat and even kept the same amount of, and displace that to subcutaneous fat, right? Even that alone would improve, insulin.
Yeah, because
insulin sensitivity. So
we've all seen that. I've seen people that are 400 pounds that are insulin sensitive.
I mean, this kind of just that personal fat threshold triggers me, Brian. So because
I know it triggers you a little bit, but I'm saying I think there's some truth to that. I really do, because I think I think of it as like if you have a moving truck, it's very easy to put stuff in there if it's empty. If it's half full, you can put more stuff. But once it's totally full, you're like, where do I put this stuff? And you have to hire all these guys, insulin, to shove them in the truck. I think that's the problem, is that we get to that point. I think there is for some people, because we have people that are 140 pounds that have type 2 diabetes. Like, how's that happen? Right? I mean, they'd have nowhere to put the stuff. It just stays in the bloodstream, and that's diabetes.
I could be convinced that's part of it for sure. I'm not 100% sold on that route, but I would be willing to like entertain future research looking at that. I think a lot of times when we do clinical work, we try and normalize all those other factors, like in terms of available stores and otherwise. So like we do that a lot with glycogen, right? We stabilize everyone's glycogen stores before we do tests. So, you'd have to do that sort of comparison, but I'd be really interested to see like how that would turn out. I think it's.
And what's interesting with your research, what I was thinking while you were saying is, okay, you take someone with no muscle mass and you run that same experiment, you run someone like you who has a ton of muscle mass, you're going to see a huge difference in where you're going to put that glucose. That's why we talk about weight bearing exercise and activity, You're
dead on, man.
Well, is it, so I think I've looked into that. 20 pounds of muscle mass, I think, is about 50 calories a day or something like that, 50 calories a day, but it's probably impactful from the in terms of BMR, but
it's not the calories. We're talking about where you put the excess carbohydrate.
Yeah. You make it more easy to basically store away that sugar, right? More muscle mass easier
I
to
think
store
it's,
sugar.
gosh, I give it Takis. Like I think we
Even
have one.
even fat, right? The triglycerides will come down too, most likely.
Like I think our bloodstream could hold 1 teaspoon of sugar, but your muscles could hold 100. And I think your liver can hold 20. So where do you want to store it in your muscle? That's the safest place to store your glycogen.
You don't got to convince me on the benefits of muscle mass, man.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell by
working-
looking at you. Yeah, you know a
Actually,
little
you know
bit
what?
about this.
This is a good segue into muscle mass, because that's what your study from earlier this year. So help me understand. Am I bringing back whole grains to my diet? Am I going to bring back whole grains? So should I? Tell me about that study, because I know it made a little bit of a splash. It was very well read. So what did you find?
This was an awesome study, and one that's like really near and dear to my heart too, because I've always been interested in protein turnover, and I've never been able to like publish a study and conduct a study on protein turnover. So it was a blast for me to like get in that realm. But this was actually an original study that was built by John Kerwin, and he wanted to look at differences between a whole grain diet and a refined grain diet. And the general perception we have in the United States, and the data supports it, is that most people eat plenty grains, but they're primarily refined grains. The average serving, I think, for a lot of people in terms of whole grains is like 1/3 or 1/6 of anywhere where it should be.
Can you help me understand? Because we use this whole grain term and refined grain term. It's really nebulous. Like, give me two products I would know. So if you've ate a bunch of, X versus ate a bunch of Y.
Yeah, and it's brutal. The definitions are really confusing. Even as myself, you're converting between ounces and grams. It's nuts. But in general, right, if you can find something that has the entire whole grain kernel, which would be like oatmeal, right? Or if you buy the whole grain bread.
Not. So you're talking about steel cut oatmeal, not like the powder oatmeal that they.
Yeah, not the powderized stuff.
Like
just, grab like
sugar.
your Quaker oatmeal, like you've got whole grains in there, right?
Right, got it.
Cheerios has plenty of whole grains. No, I'm joking. They do have whole grains in there, but I think there's something different than just having whole grain components and having the entire whole grain.
Are you talking about like couscous and cracked wheat? And is that like a whole grain? Is that a whole?
Yeah,
grain?
but it's not as intense as you would think. Like, so yeah, you have all those items, but more so it's really just focusing on your items that aren't processed to be refined. So.
Well, I'm still struggling to.
White rice,
listener, give me more whole grains I could eat from.
Oatmeal, brown rice, barley, like wheat.
So like cracked wheat and like those type of, what's that? Couscous is a whole grain, right? The cracked wheat, is it? So I'm just trying to like what else?
So what's the outcome?
So
the refined grain, just so I read, refined grain would be like the granola bar, the average granola bar, right? Or is that also a whole grain?
Yeah, probably the average granola bar is probably.
Well, the advertising is
the difference. The difference is whether or not. So, like the whole grain has like 3 components, right? You can envision it kind of like an egg, right? It's got this outer shell, right? There's lots of fiber and protein in that. There's an inner germ, which has like some healthy fats and some other items. And then the majority of it is just a starchy endosperm. And so the whole grain has all 3 of those components, right? The refined grain takes away everything except the starchy endosperm. So these are going to be like your fully finely processed, like you'll see white flour, right? You'll see.
So anything with flour is a refined grain.
Anything with processed flour. So you can mill grains and maintain the whole grain components. So you can have whole wheat flour contain the whole grain components.
Because they're not sifting it. They're putting the whole thing in there and making it from that.
Right.
Okay.
So there's milling and refining. Milling is like the breaking that down. You can powderize it. It doesn't matter. Refining is actually pulling off that germ endosperm, and then you have just that refined grain product, white rice, right? So that's the main difference. The majority of, like, I would say oatmeals that you buy in like a giant container are probably whole grain, right? The majority of brown rice that you buy in a big container, whole grain, barley, all those sorts of things, right? When you come down to the really refined products, like you were mentioning, probably the granola bars that go through a bunch of different processing. You have like your refined grain cereals. Like those are very.
If you're adding water and boiling and cooking, that's whole grain. Otherwise, it's
Yeah, if it's a pain
probably
in the butt to do, it's whole
That's
grain.
an easy way to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
outside
that's
of,
it.
outside of loaves of bread. Yeah, I think that's an easy cutoff to make. Yeah.
got it. Okay. All right. So what happens if I do the whole wheat? Should I be eating grains? Tell me.
So this is what we were interested in looking at, was protein turnover. John has already shown that when you have a whole grain diet, it improves cardiovascular health outcomes compared to a refined grain diet. And we matched calories, proteins, carbs, fats, everything was matched.
Fiber?
Except fiber was a little higher, but it was awful close. It was like statistically different, but it was not a big difference.
Got it.
Right? I forget the actual numbers, but John's paper was AJCN 2016 on whole grain and cardiovascular health outcomes. But it was statistically different because the diets were precise. Diets were fully provided. We weren't counseling people. We were giving them food and they were eating it. And so cardiovascular outcomes were better. I think blood pressure was the primary one. They've done some work on glucose control and insulin response. This was from Steve Mallon, who is now at Rutgers, I believe. So he's done some cool work there. And then this third part is on protein turnover. And I've always liked protein turnover stuff, right? So what we showed was that when you have this whole grain diet compared to the refined grain diet, is your net balance in terms of your protein turnover is greater on the whole grain diet. And when you talk about whole body protein turnover, where is like protein coming from or going, right? You have your gut, you have your muscles. So it's not all just muscle, right? So we didn't do muscle specific measures of protein turnover. We just looked at whole body protein turnover. But you had a better net positive protein balance on the whole grain diet. And that, just as a general sense, is long-term, right, associated with better maintenance of critical physiological tissues, like your muscle and other organs, right? So that was kind of the cool thing. And this was cool because the vast majority of prior research on protein turnover has looked at protein intake, calorie intake. There was some work on like anabolics in burn patients and otherwise, but no one's really looked at like non-protein related components. And whole grains was a really cool way to look at that. So this was really unique in the sense that we were able to show a significant difference on a whole grain diet when protein was matched, when calories were matched. And so that was what was special about it. And so then we took that into the cell culture. And now we use muscle cells specifically. And we looked at whether or not if we put phytonutrient components from whole grains onto muscle cells in a petri dish, would that impact protein synthesis? And we can measure that in the actual cell. And it had a significant impact. It increased global protein synthesis in these skeletal muscle cells. So that was just a really cool translational sort of project to go from there to there. And so then the thought was, all right, okay, if whole grains do in fact have this beneficial effect, we should see it when we look at the epidemiology, right? We should be able to see people that have whole grains do better in terms of something like muscle mass or muscle function in older adults. So that's what we did. We probed the NHANES database. And if people aren't familiar with that, it's the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's a huge epidemiologic study on people in the US, been going on for decades. They do diet analysis, they do physical measures, they do all sorts of things to just look at what people are eating and how that's impacting their health and a bunch of other items, environmental factors and otherwise. So what did we see there? Well, when we looked at older adults, we saw that older adults that had a higher whole grain intake had better muscle function as they were older. We looked at walking speed. So older individuals were then able to have improved walking speed compared to those that ate refined grains compared to whole grains. We didn't compare refined and whole. Let me state that correctly. People that had more whole grains had the better walking speed as opposed to people that had less whole grains. So, and we controlled for protein intake and age and sex and all the standard epidemiological stuff.
But they could have also taken a lot of processed grains also.
They may have, yeah. So we didn't compare the difference between refined and whole grains. We just wanted to see, does whole grain intake have this effect?
So do you think whole grain intake, like if someone's carnivore and added whole grains, do you think that would improve their their protein turnover?
So it's so hard to tell because the data that we have is not on people that were on a low carb diet and have that low carb physiology. So I don't want to just like assume that the physiology necessarily translates, because we're learning more and more about the differences of like a low carb physiology. In theory, my thought would be, if I take a step back and I say, okay, if you want an optimal diet to optimize protein balance, in my mind, that would include whole grains. Is that true if you're primarily doing a low carbohydrate thing? I have no idea. And I'll also say that like, this is not like a cornerstone foundational publication that says this is definitely the case. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And we're all saying, hey, we're all saying the same thing, whether you're vegan or whatever. It's like saying cut out the processed junk and eat real food. Like ultimately, it's kind of hard to eat a ton of steel cut oats compared to what you're going to eat on Cheerios, right? I mean, there's certain things like that, and the glycemic response and all that. So, man, this is good stuff. Well, tell us about your carnivore stuff, unless Tro has questions.
Hold on. Yeah, I got a quick question. All right. So do you think, like, let's just tease things out. Let's say you took the same amount of calories and now you wouldn't be matching protein and you wouldn't be matching, but you supplemented meat, right? What do you think the outcomes would be? And then help me understand, do you think it's something in the whole grain that is better, or something in the refinement that causes something worse? So you get what I'm saying? So
yes,
is it,
absolutely.
so you mentioned like you injected muscle cells with whole grains versus refined grains. So, and you saw a better improvement. Is there something with refined grains that harms, or is it something in the whole grains that helps?
So this is going to go back to my like just kind of hippie perspective on food and phytonutrients and otherwise. Is I would believe it's something inherent to the whole grains. One of those phytonutrient compounds that is having an effect on the cells, a positive effect. We did screen a handful of phytonutrients that we thought might be the like pivotal factor that's impacting the cellular protein turnover. But those didn't come out. What was really significant was when we used an entire whole wheat extract. So we purchased, this was actually a product from Germany, but they had an extract, a whole grain extract of whole wheat. And so we took that and we made it into the cellular media and put that on the cells. And that contains all the different phytonutrients, right? We did profiling of what was in there. It was a lot of like lipid sort of components. So my thought, and again, this is just what I think, right? This isn't tried and true and proven through a bunch of research studies that verify it, but I would think it's something inherent to the whole grains that has an effect. Now, to your question on red meat, if you did the same sort of type of study and did red meat, we have data out there.
Quantify the effect. Like, let's say I gave somebody the same amount of calories of leucine on MPS. Like, what are we talking about here in terms of that effect, right? Is it like, it's kind of like, people want to, I don't know, eat, like take red yeast, when their cholesterol is high versus, a HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor, which would have a, 10 times the effect. Like, what is the effect of that?
Yeah. We don't really know. So we measured body composition, and this wasn't in my report. This was in John Kerwin's initial report from 2016. But we looked at body composition differences between the whole grain and refined grain group. It was an 8-week study, and there were no significant differences in body composition over those 8 weeks. They weren't resistance training. They weren't exercising, right? It was just a diet study. So I would be really interested to follow up on that end and see if we can find some sort of effect size for having whole grains when you have an entire environment that's going to build muscle. Is this an effect that can improve muscle building? That would be really cool.
And it would be
we don't have anything to support that, but that would be cool.
It would be interesting.
What about weight loss? Is this something where you can improve protein balance during weight loss? We don't know. And I want to be very clear. We don't have data that would suggest it does either of those. But when you look at the study we did, which was non-exercising, isocaloric, and you see this difference in protein turnover, to me, that's really interessome.
Yeah.
So I can't answer your question, but I think it's like a great
right now, our understanding is there's some between whole grains has something in it, okay, that is beneficial. or refinement is particularly harmful? We're not quite sure.
I would believe that whole grains have something in it. I think there's enough profiling we've done on whole grains and those components in other studies to say that there are things in whole grains that have a positive effect. Do we know which one, or is it a mix of all of them? That we don't know. But when you look at the difference between whole grains and refined grains, there's really not components in refined grains that aren't in whole grains, unless you talk about like other items in the food product.
Maybe
Yeah,
we're
it's a-
destroying something that we don't really know.
Well, you know, and it's an interesting thing because I've been intrigued by this, and Troy, you may have seen the same. I have people that go to Italy, for instance, for a week, and they're eating pasta and bread and pizza, and their sugars.
They're different, man.
There's something different about it. Or
Yeah.
the other possibility is that when they're in Italy, they're not stressed, they're relaxing, they're looking over the countryside, and they're chilling a little bit more too. Maybe
Walking
that has
more
something to
too,
do with
yeah.
it. It may be both.
But the people in his study aren't like, any less or more stressed, right? They're randomized. So
Yeah, no. I mean, but there has to be some. But I'm looking just at the glycemic. I don't know that you guys looked at that. The glycemic response will be different. I would think that the response that when you give them a glucose load might
we
be
know
different
that.
on whole grain versus
Absolutely.
processed.
Right. You're right. The refined grains are always more glycemic. There's more
And
hunger.
more addictive too.
Yeah, more hunger after.
There's a difference. There's definitely a difference.
So got it. Okay. So I'm going to segue here because I know Brian's like wants to know. He's got another podcast, I'm sure. And like,
no, I got patience, man. But we have our Patreon people. We want if they have questions, I want them to be able
hold
to
on. Let's find out about the carnivore study. So how did you?
Yeah, that's what I want to hear.
So how did you get involved in this? What piqued your interest? I mean, you're in basically Louisiana, which is the what is it? The king cake capital of the world? Is that
Yeah,
what
we started selling them in the stores already, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in this? And for somebody who wants to include foods, it's a huge population of people who specifically exclude foods. So help me understand what piqued your interest.
So honestly, man, I love everything about nutrition, right? And so there are, you hear about the carnivore diet on Twitter, and I'll start off by saying, I'm not the biggest fan of all the messaging that comes out of different like camps on social media, right? But I am interested in understanding about nutrition. And what has been so interesting about this group is these self-reported effects that their specific diet has on their body. And it's very different than anything we've seen before, right? It's kind of the counter to like a vegan diet, right? So, this is very different. And so it was really just wanting to understand the diet patterns of these people that led me into it. And I talked with people in that community, and you guys may know Travis Statham. I love talking to anyone about nutrition all the time ever. So like if anyone's on this and want to email me, like do it. I will chat with you. And so that just kind of evolved into this discussion. And I do large scale nutrition assessments. So it's like electronic. I can get people's diet records and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to do that for a carnivore population. And then Travis was like, hey, we have David Ludwig and otherwise that are just building this separate question that is more on the effects and self-reported effects of people on the carnivore diet. So that wasn't my initial idea. I really wanted to quantify the diet. And I'm still looking for ways to be able to do that. But getting on this study, which used more of like a kind of food frequency questionnaire sort of item, and all these like self-reported physiological items, how did you feel before and after? How were your labs? How was your body weight? And we just wanted to characterize it, right? We just wanted to see what the people that eat this way, how do they perceive their diet has helped them? And so that's what the study did. It sent out a survey to this large community of individuals on a carnivore diet. And we were able to show really positive self-reported aspects to consuming this carnivore diet in this select population. But there's something unique to be said about, putting that to paper and putting that out there so that other people can see this isn't just random people on social media or otherwise that are eating a certain way and reporting this. There's a large number of them. And so that's, in my mind, one of the initial steps into better understanding the physiology of what that sort of diet does, is just first characterizing it and then moving from there. So personally, in my mind, the next step is to get a really detailed understanding of their diet, not necessarily just these food frequency questionnaires, but more of our gold standard, the multiple 24-hour dietary recalls, which is where essentially we ask you, what did you eat yesterday, midnight to midnight, tell me everything. And then people get that multiple times over the course of a long period. So that's, in my mind, the next.
Did you have a heart attack when you saw these people just eating meat, and not sharing your hippie principles, like it's like, oh my God, the rainbow.
So what were the big things that people self-reported that you say, wow, that's kind of interesting? Because I know Tro and I have talked about this a lot in the podcast, some of the stuff we've heard. And I said, Tro, let's try to figure this out. So anything that you heard that people like, that was a theme that people said this got better?
The reduction of prescription medications. And again, this is my like hippie perspective, but I'm like, the less drugs I think and I don't mean to disregard the powerful impact that drugs have to improve.
But you can't be a hippie and talk bad about drugs, man.
Yeah, you gotta be pro-drug, bro.
so I want to make sure I'm clear about that. But like, if you can get to a point where you can take less of them, that's huge.
Well, we're two docs here. We're 100% in the same idea, right? It's like, let's get rid of the drugs if we can. Why take a drug if you don't need it anymore? So the med tapering, that's pretty interesting. I've seen the same.
Yeah, and so that was the biggest thing that popped out to me.
Was there any other common report that you thought was interesting? I know I've seen joint pain, reflux, and mood were like
mental anxiety, stress, and eczema. A lot of eczema improvement.
The last 5 years, we've seen so much data on the mental health benefits of diet. So, what did you see? Were those quantified? Those particular areas?
Yeah, there was so much in there, and I didn't design or implement those surveys. This was the first author, Belinda. So she did that. So I don't have like all that knowledge stuck in my head, to be honest with you. There were a ton of different things they measured, but yeah, like for anyone interested, read the report and look through there. There were a handful of items that came out significant, but like yes, everything you said was mirrored in there. We had GI, skin, all these or other items. Oh, and one important thing too is, we looked at common symptoms that would be associated with nutrient deficiencies. And I think this was a big point as well with the study, is we didn't find people getting worse on common symptoms that would be associated with nutrient deficiencies, like
gum bleeding and stuff, like joint pain.
Yeah. So these are things. Yeah, a lot of it is dermatological, but so this is interesting because when you take a step back and you do a diet analysis, you're like, man, this diet is deficient in so many items. Like, that's a major issue. And it's impossible to really tell from this sort of study whether or not people are consuming these nutrients in other amounts in different ways, whether it's a diet holiday or otherwise, so they're getting enough, right? We don't know. Or if they're really consuming less than our standard recommendations and not having symptoms, potentially because of that long-term different physiologies. So that's a really cool question that comes out of this is, okay, are these people eating these nutrients that we consider so essential, or are they just not having, the clinical symptoms, but do they have subclinical symptoms? We just don't know.
Yeah, and can it be that the processed foods acting as an anti-nutrient, right? So it's causing other problems. So if you get rid of that, then you don't need to have all these extra nutrients sometimes. I don't know, because Sean Baker seems he appears to be fairly healthy to me.
I have to be honest with you, the only people I've seen nutritional deficiencies are in severe metabolic syndrome, and we see vitamin D being low, and they adopt a low carb diet. Vitamin C kind of being a little low, folate being a little low. And the other thing I'll tell you to be careful about is I've had people on desiccated organs thinking they were getting enough folate. They weren't, right? We've checked that so much to tell you that I don't even tell people to consider it, really. But we've seen few cases of vitamin C deficiency, folate deficiency I've seen.
And that's a dangerous one, man. That's the one that scares me.
Folate or vitamin C?
Folate, especially when you talk about like women of childbearing age. And so like that is the one that I get most concerned with. And for people that are less,
it's rarely the young women. It's typically, somebody who has metabolic syndrome, older, and if I had to, like, my hippie theory would be metabolic syndrome and hyperinsulinemia is literally depleting nutrients. And when they go on a diet acutely, they're basically restricting in the face of depletion, right? So those are the people that I've seen it in, and this is just my own clinical, and we see that with vitamin D. Like the young kids with metabolic syndrome. I have a 27-year-old kid who came to me just yesterday. I saw him finished up after 6 months. His A1C was 9 when he started. Now his A1C is 6.5. His CRP was 10. Now his CRP is 3. And this is the huge kicker here. His vitamin D was 18 when he started. It was 100. It was 100 in 6 months, right? Like, I mean, and you can't explain that with some steak and some eggs, right? Like you can't, like, there's something depleting the vitamin D, and it's the winter.
This is where the research questions come from, man. Like,
yeah, these are that's what's so great, and that's why in medicine we've lost the ability to openly debate and discuss to say, hey, look, what are you seeing? What am I seeing? And let's put these together, because the vitamin D issue, we know I don't think it's controversial anymore saying low vitamin D is a huge risk factor for dying of COVID. Right, which is associated with high visceral fat, high insulin levels, insulin resistance, and all this stuff we're talking about. So we're all coming back to nutrition, saying, hey, how come we're not looking at this? We should at least look at this as a supplement vitamin D, or get metabolically healthy, and you don't need to supplement. Maybe like what Tro's saying, if you go up to 100, that kid is in a lot different shape than he was when he came in.
And vitamin D, we're learning so much more about. I'll remember. Back in my undergrad, they changed the recommended intake for vitamin D. And that was huge, right? It was like, whoa, we previously defined the amount you need for this essential nutrient, and now we're increasing it. And that was really cool at the time. And we're just learning more and more and more and more about it. So yeah, vitamin D especially is a big one. And I think the more we know about that, the better. I mean, I like supplements, like dietary supplements. Again, this is my, off-label.
Your bias, yeah.
But yeah, I like multivitamins. I like C, D, and fish oil, and like that's kind of what I like outside of like.
So one of the things we've done is we've used in this clinic either Labdoor, which verifies the contents of supplements, or Consumer Lab, which is a not-for-profit. It's subscription based, but they analyze the contents of supplements to make sure you're not getting screwed. So that's the thing. I've seen so many, people who were concerned about folate deficiency and, had elevated homocysteines,
what's our best natural source of folic acid?
It's green leafy vegetables.
Green leafy vegetables, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. Green leafy vegetables and everything else is fortified, right? So that's right. Oh, sorry, Jake. Jake's a fucking PhD.
Oh, come on, man. You almost got through the whole thing.
I'm fucking talking here. Jake.
Oh my gosh, twice in a second, like 30 seconds.
Sorry,
Jeez.
Jake, tell us.
You're relapsing, man.
If you're on a low carb diet, where can I get folate from? Where can I get vitamin C from? Can you, help me understand, right? I don't want the sugar. I don't want the starch. Where am I going to get it from?
I wouldn't risk it. I would take a multivitamin, but that's what I would do. And the majority of people that I work with that we put on like weight loss specific low carb diets, I always recommend a multivitamin. I don't like risking things, especially when it comes to folate, because of how impactful they are.
You just pee out the extra, right?
On fetal development. So
yeah, I think it's a huge deal.
Yeah. So I don't like to risk it.
Eat real food.
I mean, it's fortified all over. It's fortified all over the place now. As you said, green leafy vegetables is good, but the grains are good too, and otherwise. So obviously that doesn't fit into the low carb profile, but
so the green leafy does. Green leafy.
Yeah, that totally does. Yeah, that totally does.
Yeah. What about vitamin C? Where can I get my vitamin C?
I would do the berries. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen the like research grade ketogenic diets that they do that include like a half cup of berries every day, and you can get them that route. You know what I mean? It's not like you have to consume tons and tons and hundreds of grams of fruit to be able to get this amount. We're talking about eat an orange, right? Like it's not going to be so many carbohydrates that.
But Tro said fruit is poison. I heard my friend told me that.
Yeah,
My
that's
friend on the internet.
You know,
that-
Our
the
Canadian-
amount can get brutal, right? Like if you're eating a whole like honey.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. It's
So-
just eating for
well,
health.
So I've looked into that. Raw peppers, more vitamin C per calorie.
Yeah,
I usually tell people if
and
you
they're
cook
good
them,
too.
You
Yeah,
guys eat
You
raw
cook them
peppers
in
though?
pot.
I can't eat the raw peppers. I gotta
Oh,
cook
yeah,
them.
let me tell you,
And
after
the
you
little
drop
ones?
sugar, the little ones are crack. You know, the
Yeah,
little
they're
ones
really
are
good, man.
so
Oh, okay, the tiny ones.
yeah, they're so sweet, but now I eat that bitterness has gone away. It's been 7 years I've been low carb. I don't know, Brian. I can eat a green pepper. It tastes sweet to me.
Yeah, really sweet
Bizarre.
to me too.
I mean,
Yeah,
but if you cook it, the vitamin C is gone. So I'm with you. I recommend supplements, and if you're going to use a supplement, then
Make sure it's good.
especially if you're looking to lose weight.
I'll tell you guys a supplement. One of my guys, his sugars kept going up at like right before dinner time. His sugars were going crazy. Like certain days they would. Certain he goes, Doc, this is crazy. I'm eating the same food. I'm eating the same thing, and one day it spikes and one day it doesn't. I don't know why. He has a continuous glucose monitor. He was taking gummy vitamins, and they had so much sugar, and it was actually showing up on the continuous glucose. He was taking a bunch of vitamins, but they were all in gummy forms. Like, just take real vitamins. You don't need to have gummy vitamins. Just eat
Those
real.
gummy vitamins are brutal, man.
They're
Yeah, tons
my
of
kids
sugar,
are like,
man.
Dad, can I have two? I'm
Yeah,
like,
give me all. I'm gonna have all
yeah,
kinds of vitamins.
figure
Yeah,
something out here.
yeah, that's a trick for kids. Us adults can't fall for that unless you're metabolic. Unless you look like Jake, you can't eat that.
Yeah.
So, hey, Drew, we have some questions from our Patreon people, man.
Yeah. One quick thing. One last thing. Okay. So the one last thing about folate, just because we were talking about it, there are some people, even when you supplement folate, they don't metabolize folate. So if you have a high homocysteine and a low folate, despite supplementation, consider genetic testing. Talk to your doctor. Consider genetic testing. There's some people who do not methylate folate, so you can take all the supplements you want. You may not even be getting it. So that's something to consider. Yeah, Jake, we got a question here. Okay, so one of our, this is Chris Cornell. If you guys don't know him, he's been on Life's Best Medicine podcast, our podcast, other podcasts. He's helped my practice out.
My practice, he does everything.
So any recommendations for someone on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet with respect to adding fiber? Would it be reasonable to experiment with simply experimenting with, say, a large bowl of steel cut oats meal once a day, or more likely to help by splitting it up into 2 or 3 smaller servings? I'd wonder what the goal is there, Chris, but yeah, what's your take?
Cool. And thanks for the question, Chris. Great to chat with you. We interact on Twitter all the time. So really cool stuff. I would say, one thing you can do if you want to stay the really low carb route and still get your fiber in is you can get that, insoluble fiber, your greens, your fruits, your vegetables, those sort of items that are lower carbohydrate and calorie. In terms of I think oatmeal's a great way to do it. I don't think you need that much. So if you have a low carbohydrate goal where you're staying 50, 75 grams of carbs, which I think is a reasonable spot for a lot of people, depending on what your particular goal is. I would just toss that oatmeal in. And if you want to split it out across multiple meals, I think that's a fine route too. It depends on whether or not you care about the short-term blood sugar changes and how much of oatmeal you're putting in there, right? So if you're going to have 2 giant bowls of oatmeal, is it better to do it at once or spread out throughout the day? It's so hard. It's so hard to tell. It just depends on what your goals are. If you want to see less glucose excursions in terms of less number of them, then do it all at once. If you don't want to see you go past a certain blood sugar level, then maybe spread it out. But that's a way to get sort of that soluble fiber, which has its own important heart health benefits. So I love something like oatmeal, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be something you have every day, right? But I think finding a way to fit that in would be great. I'm a fan of putting carbohydrates in before and after workouts. Chris, I know you're an avid, I think you both weightlift and run. If you have that before or after, I mean, the impact on your blood sugar is going to be so negligible.
Yeah, it's gonna be nothing.
That would be the time that I would look at doing it. With something like oatmeal, it's a little heavy. You might not want it before a run. It's personal preference, but that's what I would do.
Oh, Jake, while we're on that, just one question. The question that always comes up when people go carnivore is everyone's worried about not getting enough fiber and they're being constipated. And when you guys did that survey, was constipation a problem for the carnivores?
It was reported. I can't remember if it was a major issue, which probably means it wasn't super impactful.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I was curious on that because most people I talk to, their gut health gets better.
Yeah, we did have people report it. And I mean, one of the reasons you could see that is, you have underlying your subclinical like food or nutrient intolerances, not nutrient, just let's just say food intolerances, that maybe just go unrecognized and can cause some GI related symptoms. And we have ways to address that. If someone came to me as a dietitian and said, hey, I'm having these problems, we have ways to address that systematically. But you have something like this carnivore approach that just essentially takes what we would do over the course of, a period of 6 months or whatever, and just wipes out everything. And so if you had one of those intolerances, they are now gone. And whether that for your physiology is better than having more fiber, people have different responses. And I think that's important to recognize. Like, the really important thing with this carnivore study is to say, like, we're not saying by any means that the carnivore diet is necessarily healthy or that everyone should do it. It's saying we have people that are self-reporting to benefit from it.
Yeah, if you have certain conditions that benefit from it, you might try it. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. If it works, great. You got rid of your problem. I
would always just recommend working with a physician and or a dietitian for that. There's just so much that people don't really know, that we as dietitians can help with, or you guys as physicians can help with. So if you want to do this, like, talk to your care provider, ask them the question, ask them if they know someone that you can talk to. And if they're really standoffish, like, find another care provider to ask. I don't think that's a big issue. It's hard for people to advocate for themselves. And I think this is one of the issues, just like in general with people's health, is, dude, doctors are overstressed, man. It's crazy. You guys see so many patients, it's nuts. So, like, a lot of times you do get sort of generic responses. And so advocate for yourself. Get in
or responses where they have no knowledge in that area. They go, that's not good. Well, why not? I don't know. It's just not good. Well, because I haven't studied it, so I don't want to talk about it. That's what happens a lot.
Incompetence is a big problem here, Jake. And the one thing I found is, I was 350 pounds, board certified in internal medicine, interested in nutrition my entire life. I had no clue about what low carb is, how it works, what it does, anything about nutrition, ketosis. Carnivore 5 years ago was crazy. 6 years ago was crazy. I mean, now you put out research saying that it's, kind of reporting on how people feel on it, but most people don't even know about it. Problem is most practitioners are terrible. And if you came to me 5 years ago, I would have been that person.
And I'm telling you, I'm learning from like Amy Berger. There's different people where they go, you're mismanaging this, the thyroid or whatever. And I think it's so important. We have to keep an open mind and look and say, okay, if people aren't, everyone's responding great, you say, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But when you start seeing those different things, you say, could it be weird stuff like some kind of, candida infection or whatever? I mean, all those things that nutritionally, and I think that's a big part. I think, mark my words, in a year, we'll be talking about this, of saying, when you change your diet, you cut out the processed food, it's going to change your gut microbiome, but it also, say you have parasites or say you have some kind of a weird yeast infection, different things like that. When you change your diet and you take away the food source for these things, I think we're going to learn a lot about addiction. And I think part of the food addiction is if you have bacteria or different things that are giving off hormones, trying to get you to eat more to feed them. Right. And so you're just you're the carrier. So I've seen a lot of stuff along these lines but no one's really kind of tied all these things together about getting proper nutrition. And Jake, having good nutrition, if people have good nutrition, they're not craving and they're not starving all the time. So when people are sick, they really are hungry all the time because they just don't feel good. And they think, if I eat something, I'll feel better, but it doesn't work. It makes you worse. So I think we get into so much of that. I think we're going to learn a lot where we say, oh my gosh, the stuff we didn't really understand, we're starting to put 2 and 2 together sometimes.
Might take more than a year, but I think it's a great perspective.
Jake, give us their last words. How do people find you if they want to get in touch with you? And can I give them a little preview? Me and Jake are potentially going to work together on a project, and
I'll pray for you, Jake.
Not going to let you guys know what it's about, but I'm now an industry sponsor, and a collaborator. So and I'm grateful for that. It's crazy how the world works. You meet people, you're like, I'll never agree with this guy. He's got a name, Cake Nutrition. And then 2 years later, you meet them. And then 3 years after that, you're like, shit, maybe we can do something good together.
Well, and that's why social media is so hard, because everyone gets so defensive on someone just saying, okay, that's your perspective. Teach me your perspective, and we can learn from each other. Because I think, a lot of us have been guilty about criticizing the nutritionist and the dietitian and whoever, other specialties, endocrinologists. And so like, let's try to work together and figure this out. Like the lives are at stake and we have to figure this out. It's not about egos anymore. We got to figure it out. So I think that's why when we start coming together and talking and having open debate, then we could say, oh, that makes a point, or no, you're an idiot, I'm not going to follow that, or I try it doesn't work, okay, I'll try something else. I think we have to, as adults, we have to be able to figure these things out. And can you have cake sometimes? Tro, can we have cake sometimes?
Just keep it low carb.
Low carb. Yeah,
you don't want the refined flour, right? You don't want the refined flour. No, that's Jake.
Well, you don't want whole grain cake either. That is not
it's not as good, right? You're gonna do it right.
We can get you great almond flour cake, and actually almond flour diets have been shown. Low carb almond flour diets have been shown to improve depression scores. Just an FYI.
I might test it out. Like I love cooking, so I might grab something like that and do some side by side comparisons.
Yeah. You might have competition, Tro.
Listen, man, I live with it. It's too good, and I tell people treat it like a spare tire. Anyway, Jake, thank you so much. How do people find you?
Twitter at Cake Nutrition. You could shoot me an email, just jake.may@cakenutrition.com. Otherwise, just like look around. I mean, I'm on Facebook and otherwise, but I don't really do that. I would go Twitter or email. But reach out to me, and thank you guys so much for having me on. This was an awesome conversation.
It was fun,
especially
man.
People with some similar perspectives and some different. I love that stuff.
Yeah, that's what we need more of. We need to learn from each other. Go, it's working. If what you're doing is working, I'm like, hey, Jake, teach me what you're doing, man. Right? We have to be able to say, oh, just because I said something a year ago doesn't mean I have to stick with that the rest of my life. I mean, perspectives change. So I think it's fun. It's good. And learning about the micronutrients and understanding ultimately we're figuring out how do we have the healthiest diet for that patient in front of me. So it's really helpful, your input of make sure you get enough folate. I mean, these are important things that people don't think about if you're just doing it on your own. So I think that's why you need to have specialists. And I think the other thing, big, huge thing that you said is the monitoring and following up. That is the biggest part of this. In Western medicine, we don't have time to see you all the time. So we're saying, okay, we'll see you in 6 months. We'll see you next year. Good luck. Good luck this year. Like, and then you come back with diabetes. So I think we have to change how we're managing and what we're doing. So I think it's so huge. And I love the research you're doing and looking at diverse areas, saying, okay, I'll look at this. That's what you do, and say, okay, this seems to be what works. So everyone keep your minds open and don't just be narrow-minded. Just observe and look and say if it works or not. Tro, you want to close this, man?
Absolutely. This is great. This has been awesome, Jake. Awesome work, continued awesome work, a career of awesome work. And hopefully you can tolerate me enough to do some of this work that we've talked about. And hopefully it comes through. Guys, Patreon supporters, thank you for supporting our not-for-profit podcast. And we are very grateful. All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, everyone. We just wanted to let you know we have Doug Reynolds here from Low Carb USA. We want to talk about the Boca conference, is one that's impacted me. And that, as a matter of fact, that conference kind of changed my life and my career path to a degree. Hearing Rob Sivis and all the great people there kind of inspired me to make some life changes. So, Tro, what do you say, man?
Oh, absolutely. These conferences are just so helpful. Doug Reynolds, Pam Devine at Low Carb USA, to create this community. And now, as this all kind of progresses and the low carb movement and metabolic health movements continue to grow, I think, I'm remembering more and more the value these conferences had, especially after these past 2 years. And I'm definitely looking forward to coming back to Boca. When was it, Brian, we went last time? Was it 2 years ago?
2 years ago. I didn't have a hotel room. I had to crash on Tro's couch, man. I got confirmation this time, man. I think I'm good.
You got your own room this time.
My own room. I get to sleep by myself. It's going to be great. So Doug, welcome. Tell us about the conference, man. We're excited. I haven't had a chance to see who's all talking and all that. So give our listeners an update.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, you mentioned Rob Sivis, so he's back again, which is always exciting. We've got you and Antro both speaking as well. Dr. Ben is back. Some new people. Amber Hearn is gracing us with their presence, which is going to be awesome. We've got Ken Berry coming, which is going to be interesting because There's a couple of people that want to talk to him about his opinions on exercise and stuff like that. So, and especially Dr. Ben. So that's going to be interesting. Dave Diamond, Dr. David Diamond is back. He's spoken at a couple of our events, but he's the anti-statin guy mainly, and always got some really cool new research and stuff that he presents about that. Somebody that Nina Teicholz actually introduced me to is Dr. Johannes Skoll, who's coming from Germany to come and speak. Amazing guy, internal medicine doc. He's specialized in emergency medicine, specialized in nutritional medicine, specialized in sports medicine. He's qualified as in preventive medicine, which I'm not even sure I've heard of that here in the States. It's something in Europe, or definitely obviously in Germany. But he's the chairman or the president of the German Academy of Preventive Medicine. So I'm really excited to meet him and see how we can work with him to expand what we're doing more into Germany. We've got contacts and stuff in a bunch of other countries, but not in Germany. So this will be hopefully a cool starting point for that. Siobhan Huggins she's a researcher that works with Dave Feltman on all his LDL stuff that he does. Philip Ovadia is a cardiothoracic surgeon who actually came to one of our Florida events a few years ago and literally got converted there. And he's just written a book like Stay Off My Operating Table, which he's literally busy promoting right now. It's just been published. And so he's actually going to do a talk. Michelle Hearn is an incredible dietitian. She spoke for the first time in San Diego. Really dynamic speaker. Sometimes you get some people that stand up there and their content's great, but sometimes their presentation's not brilliant. She's just so dynamic that like you can't help but listen. Arthur Agustin's back after the San Diego one, which I'm really excited about. He's an icon. And then Joe Niflin's been at many of our events talking about addiction, carb addiction, food addiction. Vivian Lowe, she's very involved in our outreach committee at the SMHP, and talks a lot about ethnic differences that we need to take into account, as you guys, as physicians and stuff, that different ethnicities respond differently to different inputs, right? And it's something that's not really documented, so she talks about that quite a lot.
Yeah, that's critically important.
Yeah,
to be able to reach the communities that need it the most, for sure.
Right. Pete Delanoy is talking about gout, which we haven't actually ever had a talk about gout and the benefits of this lifestyle on that. So that's going to be really interesting. And then, since it's only a 3-day event, unlike San Diego, that was like a full house for us. But then I was talking with Marco Cazella, and he really wanted to come and do something. So what we've done is we've set up I think on the Sunday at lunch, we're going to do a whole workshop teaching people like that want to now implement it, like practical stuff, especially about deprescribing and stuff like that, because he's been involved in writing papers with Eric Westman and a bunch of other people on that particular subject. So yeah, we kind of bursting at the seams in terms of our lineup for this event, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you can make it, it's amazing. I mean, we saw, when I was in San Diego, we saw Arthur Agatston. We saw all these like 4 or 5 of the giants having a discussion between sessions, and you think, wow, this is incredible. Like, to hear their takes on things, and just to be able to engage a lot of them I got to sit down and talk to and see them as people, and it's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, it was a privilege to be in the room for that, and it was one of those things that we could not have scripted it better if we tried. It just evolved into this amazing discussion, but that's the kind of thing that I think that's the best thing that's ever happened at one of our events. But there's similar things like that happening all the time in the expo area, at dinner at night. The dinners, that's one of the things that's different to San Diego, is that everybody gets to come to the dinner at this event. So, and it's all included in the price of the ticket. Friday and Saturday night, the chef, we actually were working with him a couple of days ago on the menu for this, and we work really hard with them to make sure that it is really genuine, proper keto food. So that's exciting too.
I can't wait, man. I can't wait. It's going to be great, and it's nice, warm temperature. We can escape the cold. I know it's nice in San Diego all the time, but escape the Northeast cold is always going to be nice. I really look forward to Ken Berry, Arthur Agustin. All the speakers sound really interesting. And I heard there's one guy who's really going to give a great talk there.
Collision. Yeah, amazing. Hey, and also, Doug, this will be available for people who can't make it? Will be available online?
It's available. We always did used to have a live stream, but we never really promoted it. And then once we did these 2 virtual events a couple of years ago now, because of COVID, we became fully aware of how valuable it was for people that weren't able to travel. So yes, that's if you can't attend in person, then the live stream option is available, and that gives you access then on an ongoing basis to all the videos from the event after the event. And the people that attend in person also get access to all those videos as part of the deal with their ticket.
Awesome.
I can't wait.
I hear they're raffling off a picture of Tro in his spandex shirt when he's working out, but I'm not sure. I don't want to confirm that yet.
Could be. I can't wait. I'm going to enter the raffle in for sure.
And you got to have a discount code for our people.
Yeah. So I think they should know it by now. It's LowCarbMD. It's like pretty difficult to remember, right? LowCarbMD gets them 20% off their cart. So if they are ordering the CME certificate as well, that then they add that to the cart, then the code takes the 20% off both things, the ticket and the CME certificate.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Hey, Doug, thanks for joining us. I'm glad we could talk about this. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be nice to see everyone again.
In nice warm Boca.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And so, and just that was what was so cool about, Brian, you were there in San Diego. Just the excitement of everybody actually seeing people again and being able to be in the same room and have discussions and talks again was so special. And I'm hoping that it's going to be the same in Boca.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much.